I'm Chris Wallace. The firestorm over the deal to trade 5 Taliban leaders for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Today, setting the record straight on what we know and the questions still unanswered.
We saw an opportunity and we seized it, and I make no apologies for that.
Backlash from both the right and left on the president's decision to go it alone.
The transfers went ahead with no consultation, totally not following the law.
We have now created an incentive for the enemies of the United States to try to capture American men and women in uniform in an effort to exchange them.
We'll ask former U.S. Attorney General Michael Mukasey whether President Obama broke the law by not notifying Congress, and talk with retired 4-star General Jack Keane about the military principle, leave no soldier behind. Then, as more details of Bergdahl's disappearance and captivity come to light, growing calls for a full investigation.
He voluntarily left us all behind to go do his own thing.
This man has to be accountable for his actions.
We'll sit down with parents who believe their son was killed searching for Bergdahl, and a member of his unit who says Bergdahl is absolutely a deserter. Plus, was that Rose Garden victory lap just the latest sign of incompetence in the White House? Our Sunday panel weighs in. All right now on Fox News Sunday. And hello again from Fox News in Washington. There has been fierce criticism this week of the swap of 5 Taliban leaders for Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. There are now more questions than ever about how he was captured by the enemy and how the White House handled his release. Did Bergdahl serve with honor, or was he a deserter, even a traitor? Did we give up too much to get him back? We're dedicating this hour to try to sort out the facts. We begin with Fox team coverage. Catherine Herridge puts the swap for those 5 Gitmo detainees into context. But first, Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin on how Bergdahl is recovering and how he became a Taliban prisoner. Jennifer.
Chris, Sergeant Bo Bergdahl remains at a military hospital in Landstuhl, Germany. We're told he is physically sound, no sign of chronic or fatal disease, despite the administration saying that concern over his declining health was the reason they moved swiftly to exchange prisoners for his release. Military investigators are standing by to debrief him as soon as the doctors and psychologists say that he is ready. There are still questions about why Bergdahl left his base in eastern Afghanistan on June 30th, 2009. He had left his base at least once before. Defense officials confirm that Bergdahl did try to escape from the Taliban at least once, and after attempting to do so a year into his captivity, his captors confined him to a cage and to solitary confinement for periods of time. A 2010 Army investigation into his disappearance concluded he willfully walked off base but stopped short of declaring him a deserter because they could not establish his intent. Bergdahl left his weapon and body armor at the base and took with him only a few personal items. According to cables published by WikiLeaks shortly after Bergdahl disappeared, quote, an American soldier with a camera is looking for someone who speaks English. Unit mates who indicated that Bergdahl left behind a letter explaining why he was leaving may have been referring to emails Bergdahl sent home to his parents, published in Rolling Stone magazine in 2012, in which Bergdahl wrote, quote, I am ashamed to be an American, and the title of U.S. soldier is just the lie of fools. I am sorry for everything. The horror that is America is disgusting. According to the emails obtained by Rolling Stone, Bergdahl's father responded in an email, obey your conscience. It was the last time he and his son communicated before he left his base. Bergdahl still has not spoken to his parents, according to U.S. officials. Chris?
Jennifer, thank you. Now, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge on the potential repercussions of releasing the Taliban 5. Catherine.
Chris, the number of detainees who are suspected or confirmed of returning to the battlefield is nearly 1 in 3, but a former defense official believes the number is much higher because the U.S. government only knows they've gone back to terrorism when they are killed or captured.
I'm not surprised that certain detainees who are highly radicalized go back to the fight, even after they're held in continued detention in another country, or even go through a rehabilitation program.
All 5 men were transferred by the military to Guantanamo in 2002, among them senior Taliban commanders, some with links to al-Qaeda and others associated with the worst massacres in Afghanistan. Some defenders of the swap say they have been out of the fight for a decade.
The idea that you're an old man, so you're out of the game, doesn't really mean much. These guys are rock stars in the jihadi world, especially now that they've survived Guantanamo.
Supporters of the swap point to Israel, a country tough on terrorism. In 2011, Israel traded 1,027 prisoners for Gilad Shalit, held by Hamas. But some analysts argue the Jewish state is a unique case. It puts a premium on its military because every citizen serves. Fox News has reported from the detention camps a dozen times, and while the Bush administration transferred more than 500 detainees, less than 90 have been transferred since President Obama took office. The Taliban 5 swap may have blown any remaining goodwill on Capitol Hill to close the camps.
The political reality here is that this is the poster child of unintended consequences. Now, it has had the exact opposite effect, that it's making it harder for them, I think, at least in the short term, to do transfers.
Some Republicans on the Hill are calling for open hearings, with Senator Lindsey Graham saying impeachment is on the table if the president releases more prisoners from Gitmo without congressional approval. Contrary to administration statements in an interview with Bloomberg TV, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein said she'd seen no credible evidence the Taliban would have killed Bergdahl if details of the agreement had leaked. Chris.
Catherine, thank you. There are so many aspects to this case, and we want to begin with the legal questions. Joining us now from New York, former U.S. Attorney General and former federal judge, Michael Mukasey. Judge, should President Obama, as Commander-in-Chief, order a full investigation of Bo Bergdahl's actions after he walked off that base, and a court-martial if that's what the facts lead to?
Well, I think the question of a court-martial is really up to the Army, and the Army should act swiftly. There's no reason why this case can't be presented within 6 months. The fact is that there's been an investigation into the circumstances of his disappearance, as your report indicated. We know what he did. The question of why he did it is also, I think, pretty obvious. The question is what he did afterwards. And you can't wait to try a case until you know absolutely everything about everything. We know enough.
Judge Mukasey, from what you know so far, is Bergdahl guilty of leaving his base without permission, being absent from his post? Is he guilty of being a deserter? Is he guilty of being a defector? And after 5 years of captivity, and some people initially said, well, that's enough, should he face the appropriate punishment if he is found guilty?
The question of punishment is something that comes after a court-martial. I think the question of whether he suffered enough should not at all relate to the question of whether he gets tried. Desertion is a very serious offense. It carries a penalty, if it's done in wartime, that includes possibly the death penalty. At the end of World War II, we executed a U.S. soldier in January of 1945 for desertion. So it's a very serious offense. It carries a lifetime penalty even if it's done in peacetime, because that is a very critical matter, the continued reliability of soldiers.
So you believe the death penalty should at least be on the table for Bergdahl?
No, I'm not saying the death penalty should be on the table for Bergdahl. That case at the end of World War II was virtually unique in modern times. What I'm saying is that is some indication of the seriousness with which the military does view and should view desertion.
Let's talk about another legal issue, and that is the one of congressional notification. When the president signed the Defense Authorization Act last year, it contained a provision that the administration must notify Congress not later than 30 days before the transfer or release of a prisoner from Guantanamo. Question, did the president break the law, or was that requirement an unconstitutional infringement on his executive powers?
Well, yes to both. He broke the law, but I believe that the law itself is unconstitutional. Article 2 makes him the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. This man, these people were in the custody of the armed forces. It gives him plenary authority to conduct foreign affairs. And to the extent that that statute purports to restrict his Article 2 power, I think it's unconstitutional. And he said so at the time that he signed it.
President Obama has been very clear that he would like to close Guantanamo, has said so from, I believe, the second day of his administration. Does he have the unilateral authority to do so?
He has the authority to do so, but the question is under what circumstances he does so. When Lindsey Graham called for impeachment being on the table, I think what he was disclosing and making clear is that whether you impeach somebody doesn't depend on whether they violate the law. The president can stay within his lawful powers and still commit an impeachable offense. He has the power to pardon anybody he wants. If he decided tomorrow to pardon everybody in the U.S. prison system, that would be perfectly lawful. But I think it would also raise serious questions about whether he should continue in office. The same is true of a wholesale release of dangerous people.
You wrote an article for the Washington Post that appeared Friday in which you called the president's decision ghastly and at another point grotesque for a judge. That's pretty strong language, sir.
Well, I was never known to pull punches even when I was on the bench, but I'm not a judge now, so I can call them as I see them. And why do you feel that those words are appropriate? I think those words were really applied in the column to the scene in the Rose Garden, where having made this questionable decision, the president was essentially taking a victory lap, which I thought was frankly absurd. Judge Mukasey, we want to thank you for clearing up some of the legal questions involved here. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. Good to see you. Of course, all this is happening while we're still at war in Afghanistan. To explore the military side of the controversy, retired four-star General Jack Keane, former Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. And General, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Always good to be here, Chris.
We've heard a lot from the politicians this week about the military principle, leave no soldier behind. Is that true even in a case like this where Bo Bergdahl at least walked off his post and may have deserted?
Yes, definitely. If he defected, that would be another matter. We would not go after him, and certainly with no rescue, and there'd be no negotiations for him. But this is still a United States soldier, and we want to bring him home, and we want a full accounting of what took place and his behavior. Everyone in the administration certainly knows that he deserted his post. That is a fact. They're not going to make a lot of statements about that because, frankly, we want this soldier to come home, be interrogated by an expert, and let's get all the facts on the table. And if it drives us to a court-martial, so be it. But we don't want him right now in Landstuhl with a lawyer because we're making statements that would have to protect him in his due process.
Well, you talk about one thing if he's a deserter, another if he's a defector. We got reports from James Rosen this week based on intel reports that were given to the military at the time that indicated that Bergdahl did try to escape at least twice, was severely punished, put in a cave, but that at a later point during his 5 years of captivity that he declared himself a warrior for jihad. How does the military sort that out?
The primary evidence we're going to use is certainly him. And we do have a single source reporting on everything you just described. We have multi-source reporting is the process we go through. We want to confirm a single source, particularly human sources with paid informants, which are largely what this is. Multi-sources have confirmed that he did escape. We haven't been able to confirm that there's been multiple escapes, or we have not been able to confirm, which is a violation of the code of conduct, that he sought favor from the enemy, which the single source indicates he did, or that he was in fact collaborating with the enemy, which the single source indicates that he did. An experienced, sophisticated interrogator will get to the bottom of this, I'm absolutely convinced.
There has been, I don't have to tell you, a firestorm of criticism this week over comments made by National Security Advisor Rice last Sunday on another show. Here is what she said then and how she tried to clean it up on Friday.
He served the United States with honor and distinction. What I was referring to is the fact that this was a young man who volunteered to serve his country in uniform at a time of war. That is itself a very honorable thing.
Do Bergdahl's actions, as you understand them, meet any military definition of honor and distinction? And in this past week, how do the military leaders you've spoken to regard the event, the swap, the decision to bring back Bergdahl, and the way in which it was rolled out by the administration?
Yes, certainly, yes. I mean, the fact that a citizen volunteers, becomes a soldier, becomes a paratrooper, goes to combat as a result of that, has an unblemished record, is a very good soldier, and then deserts his post and, in a sense, betrays all his comrades, that trumps all that previous behavior. So that is a distinction in of itself, and he has to be held accountable for that. And certainly the United States military, in looking at behavior like that, are not going to tolerate it. And the way soldiers feel about that, particularly his teammates, there's one word, and that's betrayed.
And how have the military leaders you've talked to this week, I know you're in close touch with a lot of folks still in the Pentagon, how do they view the way this week has rolled out?
They're outraged by the fact that the president at the Rose Garden ceremony was actually promoting an event, and in terms of public relations, and then taking his family, who, by the way, the military had advised to maintain a very low profile, and they had been maintaining a low profile, Chris, for years. And then to put them in front of the cameras like that and begin a celebration, I think that created not only anguish among those who were his teammates and those who may have lost their lives in rescuing him, but senior military leaders looked at that and just shook their head and said, why are we doing something like that?
Let's talk about another aspect of that, and that is the Taliban Five, the 5 detainees, Taliban leaders, who we swapped for Bergdahl. Defenders of the administration, we have them up on the screen here, say these are 5 graybeards who have been off the battlefield for more than a decade. And President Obama says that the risk is acceptable. Here he is.
We have released, both under my administration and previous administrations, a large number of former Taliban fighters, some of whom returned to the battlefield. But by definition, you don't do prisoner exchanges with your friends. You do them with your enemies.
General, realistically, how big a threat are these 5 men?
Okay, well, first of all, any exchange where we're trying to get back someone who's held in captivity, the deal will naturally favor those who are holding that person in captivity. That's without giving. You already emphasized that with what Prime Minister Netanyahu had to do. Secondly, these 5 Taliban guys are obviously everything that people are saying they are. The fact of the matter is that there's no conditions that are mitigating what's taking place here. They should not have access to internet, phones, visitors. They should be restricted. They should be on a military base in Qatar, and international observers keeping track of that. As we speak right now, they are reintegrating, at least with the leadership of the Taliban, on the phone, on the internet. They'll have visitors from them. So they'll eventually come back into the leadership fold of the Taliban. Make no mistake about that. The fact of the matter is, what is the risk? We're going to be down to less than 10,000 next year, U.S. troops. We're going to be down to less than 5,000 the year after that when these guys are supposedly going to go back. The fact of the matter is there is some risk there. The greater risk, though, Chris, is to all the radical Islamic movements around the world who see what the United States is willing to do to make an exchange, and that makes U.S. people, soldiers and also civilians, vulnerable to radical Islamists to grab somebody.
Finally, we have less than a minute left. The White House was defending its actions this week, saying, look, this is the kind of messy thing that happens at the end of the war. But as you point out, it isn't the end of the war. We're going to have 9,800 troops there next year, and half that all the way to the end of 2016. Is the White House being premature in talking about the end of the war?
Well, I think they've wanted to talk about the end of the war going all the way back to when he escalated the surge forces into the war. And I think this release and the way the announcement is handled is all part of the president's desire to end this war. And it's been quite inappropriate in how this has obviously been handled.
General Keane, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. Always a pleasure to talk with you, sir.
Yeah, good talking to you, Chris.
What do you think of the prisoner swap? Join the conversation on Facebook with other FNS viewers. Coming up, what really happened in Afghanistan 5 years ago. We'll get a personal perspective when we talk with a former member of Bergdahl's unit and parents who believe their son was killed searching for him. That's next.